A hinge is a handheld release without any triggers. It uses rotation to fire, which makes it a great choice for archers who are having trouble with slapping the trigger. In this video, we're going to go over everything you need to know to get started with a hinge release. Pretty much every release manufacturer has a hinge release in their lineup, and there's a ton of options with a lot of features. Some of them are going to have safety, some of them you can swap back and forth from being a thumb trigger to a hinge. They come in all different sizes and shapes. Some of them you can remove the finger sections to turn it from a 3-finger to a 2-finger to a 4-finger. Tons of options out there. And the best way to figure out which one's right for you is just to try a few. If you have friends at the archery club that shoot a hinge, shoot theirs, see what feels good in your hands. Go to an archery shop, try a few there, and then just pick one that you like and then start using it. You'll probably end up with a few over time, which is pretty normal. Once you get your release home, now you're going to want to learn how to draw it and let it down. So as I mentioned earlier, there's no triggers on a hinge release. So drawing it without firing it can become a little bit tricky, especially when you're first starting. The key is you want most of the weight to be on your index finger and your thumb. And if you see here how the release is kind of canted forward, if it's canted forward like that, it cannot fire. And when you're learning to draw, it's a good idea to set the release so it requires a lot of rotation to fire. That way it's just kind of like a built-in safety if your release doesn't have a safety. So you have it with most of the weight on your thumb and your index finger, and you can use a piece of string. This is parachute cord tied in a loop when you're first getting started, so you don't have to worry about possibly injuring yourself as you're pulling back with a bow. And if it were to release as you're pulling back, you could hit yourself in the face. It's really painful. Ask me how I know. So a string bow is a great choice when you're first getting started. So just practice the feeling of having all that weight on your index and your thumb, anchor, and then transition to putting more weight on your middle and your ring finger. And then once you've felt that transition onto those fingers, transition back onto your index finger and your thumb, and then let down. Once you're kind of comfortable with that with the string bow, try it with your real bow up close. Pull it back and let it down. And letting down is really important. Learning how to let down with the hinge release is really important. So I encourage you to practice that. Once you feel like you got that down, now you can start working on your technique for executing a shot with a hinge release. And there's a lot of different techniques out there. I'm going to go through 3 of the basic ones that I know of, but I would encourage you, after you've heard these 3 basic ones, experiment with them, and then seek out coaching in person with an archery coach, or look at some of the coaches that have their specific way of executing a hinge release. George Riles, John Dudley, there's a bunch of them on YouTube. A lot of good information out there. All right, so one of the easiest ways, well, I don't know about the easiest ways, but a common way, and it's a pretty easy concept to grasp, I guess we can call it that, is to just manipulate the release with your fingers. So you have it here, and all you're going to do is you're going to tighten with your ring finger to rotate it and cause it to fire. So you're just using your hand to rotate the release. Another way is to use relaxation to cause that release to rotate. So if you notice when you are pulling back the hinge with your thumb and your index finger tightened up to keep it from firing, your hand is kind of almost in like a half fist. But now if you were to make the back of your hand flat, you'll notice that your hand naturally rotates. And as you just slowly relax, the release fires. So that's option 2. Another one is to, once you get to anchor, you feel the weight transfer onto your middle finger and your ring finger. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna anchor, and you're gonna feel your elbow come back and around your head, and you're just gonna keep increasing pressure as you pull back and around, and that causes the release to rotate and fire. So there's 3 techniques. You can experiment, combine several techniques into one. Most people are just gonna find what works best for them, and that's perfectly okay, and that's really what you should be going for. And while you're experimenting with techniques, you're probably going to be messing with the adjustment of how much rotation is required for the release to go off. One thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to have like one big rotation to make the release fire. That's usually not going to be the most accurate. Usually you'll have a big rotation to get set, and then just like a slow, steady pressure until it releases. So pretty small movement for that last firing phase. A question I'm sure all of you have is click or no click. Most hinge releases are going to come with the ability to have it set to where it'll click when just a small amount of movement is required for it to go off. How a lot of archers like to use that is what they'll do is as they're anchoring, they'll rotate the release until it clicks, and they'll use that as a consistent starting point to start their execution. So it clicks, they'll stop that big rotation, finish their anchor, and then move into execution, and they know they only have to move the release about 10 thousandths or so to get it to fire. And that gives a really good consistent starting point. Might be a good idea when you're a beginner to do that. Some people, like myself, I started archery shooting Olympic recurve, so every time I hear that click, my body kind of just like reacts to it. So I can't shoot a click without having a reaction. So that's me. You can experiment with click or no click. It's really, again, it's a personal preference thing, but using it as a setup is a great idea. All right, there it is. Beginner's guide to a hinge release. From here, you're gonna wanna go get some coaching, watch some more YouTube videos, dive in deep, and of course, practice. I'm Scott with Archery 360. We'll see you on the next video.